October 14th, 1943, high above the German industrial city of Schweinfurt, the sky burns with the fury of modern warfare. American B-17 flying fortresses, those proud symbols of Allied air power, are being systematically destroyed by German fighters. The formations that took off from England this morning as an unstoppable armada are now scattered fragments, leaving contrails of smoke and fire across the autumn sky. In the lead bomber, Hell's Angels, Pilot Lieutenant Colonel James Thompson grips his controls as Messerschmitt Bf-109s tear through his formation like sharks through a school of fish. The radio crackles with desperate voices. "Fighter? At 3 o'clock high. We're hit. We're going down. Where's our escort? Where are the damn fighters?" The brutal mathematics of aerial warfare are playing out in real time. Of the 291 B-17s that crossed into German airspace this morning, 60 will not return. The 8th Air Force is hemorrhaging planes and crews at an unsustainable rate. At this pace, the daylight bombing campaign, America's strategy for bringing Nazi Germany to its knees, will collapse within months. But 20,000 feet below this aerial carnage, in a cramped engineering office at Republic Aviation's Farmingdale factory, a young aeronautical engineer named Alexander Kartveli is putting the finishing touches on a design that will change everything. His blueprints show an aircraft unlike anything anyone has seen, a massive, single-engine fighter that many dismiss as impossible. The Army Air Forces have already rejected his proposal twice. Too big, they said. Too heavy, too radical. They have no idea they're looking at the weapon that will make American bombers untouchable. This is 1943, and America is learning the hard lessons of strategic bombing. The theory seemed sound. Massive formations of heavily armed bombers could fight their way to targets deep in enemy territory, deliver devastating precision strikes, and return home. The B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator were designed as aerial battleships, bristling with machine guns and capable of absorbing tremendous punishment. But theory and reality are proving to be very different things. German fighters, unencumbered by the need to carry bomb loads, are faster, more maneuverable, and deadly effective. They've developed tactics specifically designed to destroy bomber formation, head-on attacks that exploit the fortresses, limited forward firepower, concentrated assaults that overwhelm the defensive systems, and persistent harassment that forces bombers to jettison their loads early or break formation. The mathematics are becoming undeniable. Without fighter escort, bombers are sitting ducks, and no existing American fighter has the range to escort bombers to targets deep in Germany and back. The P-47 Thunderbolt and P-51 Mustang are excellent fighters, but their combat radius is limited. They can protect bombers partway to their targets, but then must turn back, leaving the heavy bombers to face the most dangerous part of their mission alone. The problem plaguing American air strategy in 1943 seems insurmountable, and it's written in blood across the skies of Europe. Every mission briefing at 8th Air Force headquarters tells the same grim story. Massive bomber losses, mission objectives unmet, and aircrew casualties mounting to catastrophic levels. General Ira Eaker, commanding the 8th Air Force, stares at loss reports that read like a butcher's bill. The second Schweinfurt raid, later dubbed Black Thursday, epitomizes the crisis. 60 bombers lost in a single mission. 600 aircrew killed, wounded, or captured. The 305th Bomb Group alone loses 13 of 20 aircraft. These aren't just statistics. They represent the cream of American aviation, pilots who trained for years, bombardiers who could drop ordnance into a pickle barrel from 25,000 feet, navigators who could find their way across thousands of miles of hostile territory. At the Pentagon, Army Air Forces brass confront an unpleasant reality. At current loss rates, the entire heavy bomber force will be destroyed within 6 months. The daylight precision bombing strategy that American air doctrine is built upon is failing catastrophically. The alternative, night bombing like the British, means abandoning precision for area attacks, a compromise that goes against everything American air power theorists believe. The technical challenges seem impossible to solve. Existing fighter aircraft face the tyranny of the equation, range versus performance. To escort bombers to Berlin and back requires roughly 1/400 miles of range, but that means enormous fuel tanks, which add weight. More weight requires bigger engines, which consume more fuel, which requires even bigger tanks. It's an engineering spiral that appears to have no solution. Previous attempts to solve the escort problem have failed spectacularly. The Bell P-39 Airacobra, despite its innovative design, lacks the high-altitude performance needed for bomber escort. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning shows promise with its twin-engine design and long range, but it's complex, expensive, and troubled by engine problems at high altitude. Combat reports from the Pacific show P-38 struggling against nimble Japanese fighters. The most recent failure cuts deepest of all. Bell Aircraft's XP-67 Moonbat promised to be the long-range escort fighter America needed. With its twin-engine design and sleek, almost futuristic appearance, it looked like the answer to every prayer. But development has been a nightmare of delays, cost overruns, and technical failures. The engines overheat constantly, the landing gear is unreliable, and performance falls far short of promises. After years of development and millions of dollars, the program is quietly being cancelled. At Republic Aviation, other engineers shake their heads at Alexander Kartveli's latest proposal. His P-47 Thunderbolt is already the largest single-engine fighter in production, and now he wants to build something even bigger. The preliminary specifications seem like fantasy. A single-engine fighter weighing over 21,000 pounds, fully loaded, powered by an engine producing over 2,800 horsepower, capable of carrying enough fuel to escort bombers to any target in Germany. "It's not a fighter," scoffs one Army Air Force's procurement officer during a heated meeting at Wright Field. "It's a flying fuel tank with guns attached. No pilot could handle something that big in air-to-air combat. The Germans would shoot them down faster than we could build them." But the failures are mounting, and desperate times call for desperate measures. Every conventional solution has been tried and found wanting. Perhaps it's time to listen to the young engineer whose radical ideas have been dismissed as impossible. Alexander Kartveli doesn't look like a man destined to revolutionize aerial warfare. At 39, the Georgian-born engineer cuts an unassuming figure in his rumpled suit and thick-rimmed glasses, hunched over drafting tables in Republic Aviation's Long Island facility. His colleagues know him as brilliant but obsessive, a perfectionist who thinks in 3 dimensions and sees solutions where others see only problems. Born in Tiflis, Georgia, in 1896, Kartveli escaped the chaos of the Russian Revolution and found his way to Paris, where he studied aeronautical engineering. He arrived in America in 1927 with little more than his education and an unshakable belief that aircraft design was both art and science. While other engineers focused on incremental improvements, Kartveli thought in revolutionary terms. His P-47 Thunderbolt, already in production, proved that American fighters could be both powerful and effective. But even the P-47's impressive range falls short of what bomber escort missions demand. The inspiration for his radical new design comes from a moment of clarity during a late-night engineering session in early 1943. Studying range calculations and fuel consumption charts, Kartveli realizes that everyone has been asking the wrong question. Instead of, how do we make a fighter go farther, the question should be, how do we build an aircraft that can fight and carry enormous amounts of fuel? His answer is audacious. Forget everything anyone thinks they know about fighter design. Build the biggest, most powerful single-engine fighter ever conceived. Install the most powerful engine available, the massive Pratt & Whitney R4360 Wasp Major, a 28-cylinder behemoth producing nearly 3,000 horsepower. Design the entire aircraft around internal fuel capacity, not just performance. Accept that it will be heavy, but make it so overwhelmingly powerful that weight becomes irrelevant. The preliminary specifications for his XP-72 Ultrabolt read like science fiction. Maximum weight of 21,000 pounds, internal fuel capacity of 732 gallons, maximum speed over 490 mph, and most importantly, combat radius exceeding 1,000 miles. It would be the most powerful piston-engine fighter ever built, capable of escorting bombers to any target in the Reich and engaging German fighters on equal or superior terms. But when Kartveli presents his proposal to the Army Air Force's Review Board at Wright Field in March 1943, the reception is ice cold. Colonel Mark Bradley, the senior procurement officer, doesn't even let him finish his presentation. "Mr. Kartveli," Bradley interrupts, tapping his pen impatiently against his clipboard. "What you're proposing isn't a fighter aircraft. It's a flying locomotive, 21,000 pounds. That's heavier than some bombers. No pilot could dogfight in something that massive." "Sir, with respect," Kartveli replies in his slight Georgian accent, "you're thinking conventionally. This aircraft wouldn't dogfight like a P-51. It would use speed, altitude, and firepower to dominate the combat environment. German fighters couldn't catch it, couldn't outrun it, and couldn't outgun it." Major Thomas Wilson, the board's technical expert, shakes his head dismissively, and the engineering challenges alone would take years to solve. That engine has never been flight tested in a fighter configuration. The structural loads would be enormous, and the cost, we could build 3 P-51s for what one of these monsters would cost. "Gentlemen," Kartveli presses, spreading his detailed blueprints across the conference table. "Current loss rates make cost irrelevant. We're losing 60 bombers in a single mission. Each B-17 costs $238,000, not including crew training. Each mission we lose costs more than my entire development program would require." Colonel Bradley closes Kartveli's folder with finality. "Mr. Kartveli, we appreciate Republic's innovative thinking, but we need practical solutions, not experimental gambles. The P-51 Mustang is showing promise as a long-range escort. We'll focus our resources there. Your proposal is rejected." As Kartveli walks out of Wright Field that grey March afternoon, carrying his rejected blueprints and crushing disappointment, he has no way of knowing that events are about to make his impossible fighter the most desperately needed aircraft in the American arsenal. Black Thursday is still 7 months away, but the seeds of that disaster are already growing in the bloody skies over Germany. Despite the Army Air Force's rejection, Alexander Kartveli refuses to abandon his vision. Back at Republic Aviation's Farmingdale facility, he convinces company president Ralph Damon to fund preliminary development with corporate money, a risky gamble that could bankrupt the company if the military never changes its mind. "Sometimes," Damon tells the board of directors, "you have to build the future before anyone knows they need it." Kartveli assembles a small, dedicated team of Republic's best engineers. Working in a sequestered corner of the factory, they begin the painstaking process of turning revolutionary concepts into engineering reality. The challenges are immediate and daunting. The Pratt & Whitney R4360 Wasp Major engine exists only on paper. It's still in early development, plagued by cooling problems and mechanical failures. Building an airframe around an unproven engine is like constructing a building around a foundation that might collapse. Chief Structural Engineer Maria Kowalski, one of the few women in aircraft design, tackles the weight distribution problem. The massive engine, enormous fuel tanks, and heavy armament create a center of gravity nightmare. Traditional fighter design principles simply don't apply. "We're not building a fighter," she tells Kartveli. During one of their midnight design sessions, "We're building a completely new category of aircraft. We need to invent the engineering principles as we go." The breakthrough comes when Kartveli stops thinking about his aircraft as a scaled-up fighter and starts thinking about it as a scaled-down bomber with fighter capabilities. Instead of trying to maintain traditional fighter agility, he optimizes for what really matters in escort missions: speed, range, firepower, and survivability. The XP-72 doesn't need to dogfight. It needs to dominate the airspace around bomber formations. By June 1943, Republic has spent $200,000 of its own money on the project, a fortune that could fund an entire production run of P-47s. The prototype exists only as detailed engineering drawings and a few structural test articles, but Kartveli knows he's solving the right problems. Wind tunnel tests at Republic's private facility show that his unconventional design actually works. The massive aircraft is aerodynamically sound, stable at high speeds, and capable of the performance he promised. The engine situation improves dramatically when Pratt & Whitney successfully runs their R-4360 for 150 hours without catastrophic failure. At 3,000 horsepower, it's the most powerful piston engine ever built for aircraft use. Republic secretly negotiates for 2 prototype engines, paying premium prices for early access. When the engines arrive at Farmingdale in wooden crates marked agricultural equipment, Kartveli finally sees his dream taking physical form. The first engine run takes place on a hot July morning, with the massive power plant mounted on a test stand behind Republic's main factory. The sound is unlike anything anyone has heard, a deep, thunderous roar that shakes windows 3 blocks away. Local residents complain to police about the noise, not knowing they're hearing the sound of the future. The engine produces 2,850 horsepower at takeoff power, enough to pull the heaviest fighter ever conceived through the sky at speeds approaching 500 mph. Construction of the first XP-72 prototype begins in August 1943, even as Black Thursday looms on the horizon. Working in shifts around the clock, Republic's craftsmen hand-build an aircraft that exists nowhere else in the world. The fuselage is enormous, nearly 40 feet long and built like a battleship. The wing structure requires entirely new manufacturing techniques to handle the massive loads the aircraft will generate. Every component is oversized, over-engineered, and designed to withstand forces no fighter has ever experienced. By September, the prototype is 60% complete. But Kartveli faces a crisis. Republic's corporate funding is exhausted, and the Army still shows no interest in his radical design. The company's board of directors is pressuring Damon to halt the program and focus resources on profitable P-47 production. Kartveli knows that without military backing, his revolutionary fighter will never fly. Then on October 14, 1943, everything changes. Reports from Schweinfurt reach Washington that evening, and by the next morning, every assumption about American air strategy is being questioned. 60 bombers lost in a single mission. The daylight bombing campaign in mortal danger. Suddenly, Alexander Kartveli's impossible fighter doesn't seem so impossible after all. The call comes to Republic Aviation at 7:23 a.m. on October 16, 1943, just 48 hours after Black Thursday. Colonel Bradley, the same officer who dismissed Kartveli's proposal 7 months earlier, is now desperately seeking solution. "Mr. Kartveli?" His voice is tight with urgency over the long-distance line. "We need to discuss your XP-72 proposal immediately. How quickly can you have a flying prototype?" Kartveli's heart, but his engineer's mind calculates rapidly. "Colonel, we have a prototype 60% complete. With proper funding and priority materials allocation, we could have first flight within 90 days. What he doesn't mention is that proper funding means nearly $2 million, more than the Army has ever spent on a single fighter prototype. Within a week, a team of Army Air Forces engineers descends on Republic's Farmingdale facility. What they find amazes and terrifies them in equal measure. The XP-72 prototype dwarfs everything around it. Chief Test Pilot Lowry Brabham, a veteran who has flown every American fighter design, stares at the massive aircraft and shakes his head. "Jesus Christ! Alex! This thing is bigger than some bombers I've flown. You sure it'll even get off the ground?" The first major test comes in November, engine runs with the aircraft fully assembled. The Pratt & Whitney R4360 installation is a masterpiece of engineering, but when they fire it up for the first time in the actual airframe, disaster strikes immediately. Cooling airflow through the massive engine bay is inadequate. Within 3 minutes of reaching full power, cylinder head temperatures soar past redline. Oil temperatures spike dangerously. The engine begins to cook itself. Shut it down now!" screams engine specialist Captain Robert Hayes as temperature gauges spike into the red. Emergency crews foam the engine bay as smoke pours from cooling louvers. The most powerful fighter engine ever built has just proven it can't run for more than 3 minutes without destroying itself. The cooling crisis threatens to kill the program before the aircraft ever flies. Traditional cooling solutions won't work. The R4360 produces too much waste heat for conventional radiators and oil coolers. Kartveli's team works frantically through November and December, redesigning the entire cooling system. They enlarge air intakes, redesign ductwork, and install massive oil radiators that add 400 pounds to the aircraft's weight. The second engine test, conducted on a bitter cold December morning, seems promising at first. Temperatures remain manageable for 15 minutes at moderate power settings. But when test pilot Brabham advances the throttle to take off power, the engine explodes. The failure is catastrophic and terrifying. A connecting rod lets go at 2800 RPM, punching through the engine case and sending red-hot metal fragments in all directions. The propeller, suddenly unloaded, overspeeds violently before the emergency shutdown system engages. Oil and coolant spray across the test stand, igniting in a fireball that forces everyone to flee. The most advanced fighter prototype in the world sits wreathed in smoke and flame, its revolutionary engine destroyed. "That's it," declares Colonel Bradley during an emergency meeting at Republic the next day. "We've lost 2 months and $500,000 on an engine that can't run for 20 minutes without blowing up. The program is finished." But Kartveli refuses to surrender. Colonel B.T. Pratt & Whitney has already identified the failure mode. It's a lubrication problem in the master rod assembly, completely fixable. Every revolutionary engine goes through these growing pains. The Wright R3350 that powers the B-29 had similar problems, and look at it now. The argument that saves the program comes from an unexpected source. The latest intelligence reports from Europe. German jet aircraft are no longer rumors, they're reality. The Messerschmitt Me 262 has been photographed in flight, and its performance estimates are shocking. If Germany deploys jet fighters in large numbers, every existing Allied aircraft will be obsolete overnight. America needs its own revolutionary answer, and the XP-72 represents the ultimate evolution of piston engine fighter design. Pratt & Whitney engineers, working around the clock, identify and fix the lubrication problem by Christmas 1943. The third R4360 engine incorporates improved bearings, redesigned oil passages, and strengthened connecting rods. When they test it in January 1944, it runs flawlessly for 4 hours at full power, producing a rock-steady 2,150 horsepower. But even with the engine problems solved, the XP-72 faces new challenges. Wind tunnel tests reveal control issues at high speeds. The massive aircraft develops dangerous control reversal characteristics above 450 mph, exactly the speeds where it needs to be most effective. The control surfaces are simply too small for the enormous forces the aircraft generates. As winter turns to spring, Kartveli's team works desperately to solve each problem as it emerges. They enlarge control surfaces, redesign the rudder, and install an entirely new hydraulic control system. Each modification adds weight and complexity, pushing the aircraft further from its original specifications. By March 1944, the XP-72 program has consumed over $3.2 million and still hasn't achieved first flight. In Washington, budget-conscious officials and rival aircraft manufacturers are sharpening their knives. The program that began as a desperate solution to bomber losses is now seen by many as an expensive boondoggle that's draining resources from proven designs. Lieutenant General Barney Giles, Deputy Commanding General of the Army Air Forces, summons Kartveli to the Pentagon for what everyone knows will be a make-or-break meeting. The conference room is packed with hostile faces, procurement officers who resent the XP-72's special funding, North American aviation executives pushing their P-51 Mustang as the only escort fighter America needs, and budget analysts who see Kartveli's project as a drain on scarce wartime resources. Mr. Kartveli, General Giles begins, his voice carrying the weight of military authority. Your XP-72 was supposed to solve our escort problems. It's now March 1944, and we still don't have a flyable aircraft. Meanwhile, P-51 Mustangs equipped with drop tanks are successfully escorting our bombers to Berlin. Why should we continue funding your experimental aircraft when we have a proven solution? The room's tension is palpable. Edgar Schmuid, chief designer of the P-51 Mustang, leans forward aggressively. General, North American has delivered over 8,000 Mustangs that are winning the war right now. Republic has spent over $3 million and delivered exactly 0 operational aircraft. The P-51H we're developing will have even better performance than the current model. Why waste resources on untested technology? Colonel James Doolittle, now commanding the 8th Air Force, adds weight to the opposition. Gentlemen, I've seen what the Mustang can do in combat. My pilots love it. It's fast, maneuverable, reliable, and available in quantity. The escort problem is solved. We don't need some experimental monster that might work if we're lucky. Kartveli stands alone against this wall of opposition, his thick glasses reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. Around the table sit men who control the fate of American air power, and they've already made up their minds. The XP-72 is a costly mistake that needs to be terminated immediately. Gentlemen, Kartveli begins carefully, you're thinking about today's war, not tomorrow's. Yes, the P-51 is an excellent aircraft for current operations, but intelligence reports indicate German jet development is accelerating rapidly. The Me-262 is entering squadron service. Germany is testing rocket-powered interceptors. Our current fighters, including the Mustang, will be obsolete within 18 months. Major General Curtis LeMay, known for his blunt speaking, cuts him off. Mr. Kartveli, we're planning to end this war within 18 months. We don't need miracle weapons. We need aircraft that work now. Your XP-72 has been nothing but problems and delays. The bureaucratic knives come out in earnest. Procurement officials present damning cost analyses showing that Republic could build 12 P-47 Thunderbolts for the cost of one XP-72 prototype. Production experts argue that tooling up for XP-72 manufacturing would delay vital current aircraft production by months. Intelligence officers question whether the German jet threat is real or propaganda. Assistant Secretary of War Robert Lovett delivers what appears to be the killing blow. Mr. Kartveli, the War Production Board is under enormous pressure to maximize current production and minimize experimental programs. We simply cannot justify continuing a program that has consumed over $3 million without producing a single flight test. But as the meeting reaches its climax, an unexpected ally emerges, General Henry Hap. Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces, Humpixed, has been silent throughout the discussion. Now he speaks with quiet authority. Gentlemen, I've been listening to this debate, and I'm hearing a lot of short-term thinking. Yes, the P-51 is solving our immediate escort problems, But Mr. Kartveli raises valid points about future threats. We've learned from this war that technological superiority is temporary. The side that stops innovating loses. Arnold pulls out a classified intelligence folder. I've seen reports that Germany is developing jet fighters with performance far exceeding anything we have. If we cancel every advanced program to focus on current production, we'll win this war but lose the next one. The room falls silent. Arnold's support gives Kartveli breathing room, but opposition remains fierce. A compromise emerges. The XP-72 program will continue, but with a drastically shortened timeline. First flight must occur within 60 days, or the program will be terminated immediately. No exceptions, no extensions. As Kartveli leaves the Pentagon, he knows he's won a Pyrrhic victory. 60 days to achieve first flight with an aircraft that still has unresolved technical problems. The institutional pressure to fail has never been higher, and powerful enemies are watching for any excuse to kill his revolutionary design. Racing against the 60-day ultimatum, Kartveli transforms Republic aviation into a round-the-clock operation. The Farmingdale factory never sleeps as engineers, mechanics, and test personnel work in rotating shifts to solve the XP-72's remaining problems. Every component is scrutinized, every system tested and retested. Failure is not an option. Too many careers and too much money hang in the balance. The control surface modifications prove successful during ground testing. The enlarged rudder and redesigned elevator provide adequate control authority even at the aircraft's projected maximum speed of 490 mph. But a new problem emerges during high-speed taxi tests. The massive propeller creates gyroscopic forces that make the aircraft nearly uncontrollable during ground operations. Test pilot Lowry Brabham fights the controls as the XP-72 swerves violently down Republic's runway at 60 mph. It's like wrestling a freight train, Brabham reports, after the hair-raising taxi test. But the gyroscopic precession is enormous. When I try to raise the nose, the whole aircraft wants to turn left. It's going to be a handful during takeoff and landing. Kartveli's solution is characteristically bold. Instead of trying to eliminate the gyroscopic forces, he designs around them. Working with Pratt & Whitney engineers, they develop a special takeoff procedure that uses the gyroscopic effects to the pilot's advantage. The technique requires precise throttle control and rudder timing, but it transforms a dangerous characteristic into a manageable one. The breakthrough everyone has been waiting for comes during the final engine calibration. Chief Engineer Maria Kowalski discovers that the R4360 engine has been running far below its potential. Conservative power settings imposed during early testing have masked the engine's true capability. When they advance to full military power, 3,450 horsepower for 5-minute intervals, the performance numbers are staggering. "Alex, you need to see this," Kowalski calls excitedly from the engine test cell. The dynamometer readings show power output that exceeds even Kartveli's optimistic projections. At 3,450 horsepower, the R4360 is producing more power than many bomber engines. Extrapolating performance calculations, the XP-72 should be capable of speeds approaching 510 mph, faster than any production fighter in the world. But the most significant breakthrough comes from an unexpected source: combat reports from Europe. P-51 Mustangs, initially hailed as the perfect escort fighter, are encountering serious problems during high-altitude encounters with German jet aircraft. The Mi-262's speed advantage is so overwhelming that Mustang pilots can't engage effectively. Several squadron commanders send urgent requests for aircraft with better high-altitude Archer high-speed performance. Captain Chuck Yeager, already building his reputation as one of America's premier test pilots, arrives at Republic in early May 1944 to evaluate the XP-72's flight characteristics. His presence adds credibility to the program and silences some critics who dismissed it as an engineering exercise. Yeager spends hours in the cockpit, familiarizing himself with the massive aircraft systems and controls. "This thing is different from anything I've flown," Yeager tells Kartveli after his first cockpit session. "It doesn't feel like a fighter. It feels like a flying missile. The question is whether we can harness all that power and make it controllable." The final pre-flight inspection takes place on May 15, 1944, with Army Air Forces observers present to witness either triumph or disaster. Every system is checked and double-checked. The massive R-4360 engine runs smoothly through its complete power range. Control surfaces respond properly to pilot inputs. All flight instruments read normal. As dawn breaks over Long Island on May 16, 1944, the XP-72 sits on Republic's runway like a metallic predator, waiting to be unleashed. At over 21,000 pounds fully loaded, it's the heaviest single-engine fighter ever built. The four-blade propeller measures over 13 feet in diameter. The fuselage stretches nearly 40 feet from nose to tail. It looks less like a conventional fighter than like some evolutionary leap into the future. Yeager climbs into the cockpit at 6:30 hours, with Kartveli and a small crowd of observers watching tensely from the flight line. Radio communication is established with the control tower. Engine start is normal, though the sound of 3,000 horsepower is unlike anything heard before at Republic Aviation. As Yeager advances the throttle for his taxi to the runway, everyone knows they're about to witness either vindication or catastrophe. The moment of truth has arrived. After 18 months of development, millions of dollars in costs, and countless technical challenges, Alexander Kartveli's revolutionary fighter is finally ready to prove whether impossible dreams can become airborne reality. At 06:47 hours on May 16, 1944, disaster strikes just as victory seems within reach. Chuck Yeager has completed his pre-flight checks and is beginning his takeoff roll when the massive R-4360 engine suddenly loses power. The thunderous roar drops to an ominous rumble, and critical engine parameters spike into dangerous territory. Oil pressure plummets. Cylinder head temperatures soar past redline. Yeager immediately aborts the takeoff attempt, but damage is already done. Post-flight inspection reveals catastrophic news. The engine's supercharger has suffered a complete mechanical failure. Metal fragments have contaminated the entire lubrication system. The most powerful piston engine ever built for aircraft use is completely destroyed, and Republic Aviation doesn't have a spare. Worse yet, Pratt & Whitney's production schedule shows the next available R-4360 won't be ready for 6 weeks, long past the Pentagon's 60-day deadline. "Now that's it," declares Colonel Bradley during an emergency conference call from Washington. "The program is finished. We gave you 60 days, and you couldn't deliver. The XP-72 is cancelled effective immediately." Kartveli feels 18 months of work collapsing around him. In Washington, procurement officials are already drafting termination orders. North American aviation executives privately celebrate the elimination of their biggest competitor. The revolutionary fighter that could have changed aerial warfare will never fly, but Alexander Kartveli refuses to surrender. That same afternoon, he places a desperate call to Pratt & Whitney's East Hartford facility. "I need an R-4360 engine immediately," he tells Chief Engineer Leonard Hobbs. "I don't care if it's a development engine or a test unit or something you pulled out of a crashed bomber. The entire program depends on getting an engine within 2 weeks." Hobbs' response offers a glimmer of hope. "Alex, we have one experimental R-4360 that's been running endurance tests for the Navy's F-2G Corsair program. It's not certified for flight use, and it's been modified with experimental components. But it runs. The Navy might be willing to loan it if the stakes are high enough." The negotiations that follow involve the highest levels of military and corporate leadership. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal personally approves the engine loan after General Arnold explains the strategic importance of the XP-72 program. But there's a catch. The Navy engine uses different mounting points, different accessory drives, and different control systems. Adapting it to the XP-72 will require completely rebuilding the aircraft's engine bay. Republic's entire engineering staff works around the clock for 12 straight days, redesigning and rebuilding major aircraft systems. The modified engine installation is a masterpiece of improvisation and engineering skill, but it adds 200 pounds to the aircraft's weight and reduces maximum power to 2,950 horsepower. Performance calculations show the modifications will cost the XP-72 approximately 15 mph in maximum speed. Time pressure reaches crushing intensity as May turns to June. The Pentagon's deadline looms just days away, and any further delays will trigger automatic program cancellation. Republic's factory operates on 4-hour shifts, with exhausted workers sleeping on cots between assignments. Kartveli himself hasn't left the factory in a week. Surviving on coffee and determination. The second engine installation is completed on June 8, 1944, exactly 58 days after the Pentagon ultimatum. Chuck Yeager returns to Republic for what everyone knows will be the program's final chance. Either the XP-72 flies successfully within the next 48 hours, or the most advanced fighter in America becomes an expensive piece of hangar decoration. But as Yeager begins his pre-flight inspection, he discovers new problems. The hastily modified engine installation has created vibration issues throughout the airframe. Control cables are misaligned. Several instruments read incorrectly. The aircraft that was nearly ready for flight 2 weeks ago now feels like a prototype again. "Alex," Yeager tells Kartveli privately, "this bird isn't ready. I can probably get it off the ground, but the vibration problems could cause structural failure. We need at least another week to sort out these installation issues." Kartveli stares at his life's work, knowing that another week means program cancellation. The choice is stark: attempt a risky first flight with known problems, or watch 18 months of revolutionary engineering get scrapped by bureaucratic deadlines. In Washington, Colonel Bradley is already preparing termination paperwork. At 16:30 hours on June 9, 1944, with less than 24 hours remaining before the Pentagon deadline, Alexander Kartveli makes the most difficult decision of his engineering career. He authorizes Chuck Yeager to attempt first flight of the XP-72, knowing that failure will likely kill both the program and possibly America's greatest test pilot. At 07:15 hours on June 10, 1944, the final day of the Pentagon's ultimatum, Chuck Yeager straps himself into the cockpit of the most powerful single-engine fighter ever built. The vibration problems are still present. The hastily modified engine installation remains untested, and everyone knows this flight will either vindicate 18 months of revolutionary engineering or end in catastrophe. Republic Aviation's runway is lined with observers, Army Air Forces officials with stopwatches and clipboards, Republic engineers who have sacrificed everything for this moment, and Kartveli himself, standing silent and tense as his life's work prepares for its ultimate test. In Washington, Colonel Bradley waits by his telephone for news that will either save or kill the XP-72 program. Yeager's engine start is flawless. The modified R-4360 roars to life with a sound unlike anything in aviation, deeper and more powerful than any fighter engine before it. As he advances the throttle for taxi, the massive aircraft moves with surprising grace despite weighing over 21,000 pounds. The gyroscopic forces Kartveli's team learned to manage make the XP-72 surprisingly stable during ground operations. Republic Tower, XP-72 ready for takeoff, Yeager radios, his voice calm despite knowing he's about to test an aircraft that has never left the ground. Conditions are green for first flight attempt. At 07:23 hours, Yeager advances the throttle to take off power. The acceleration is immediate and shocking. Despite its enormous weight, the XP-72 surges down the runway with the authority of 3,000 horsepower. At 85 mph, Yeager gently pulls back on the controls, and the massive fighter lifts off as smoothly as any aircraft he's ever flown. "Holy Christ!" Jaeger breathes over the radio as the XP-72 climbs away from Republic's runway. But this thing has more power than a freight train, climbing like a homesick angel. The initial flight test envelope is conservative: basic handling characteristics, engine performance checks, and landing gear cycling. But even these simple maneuvers reveal the XP-72's extraordinary capabilities. At 10,000 feet, the aircraft is still climbing at over 4,000 feet per minute. The speed builds effortlessly toward 400 mph in level flight, with power settings that leave enormous reserves available. Most importantly, the vibration problems that seemed so serious on the ground virtually disappear once airborne. The XP-72's massive structure absorbs the engine's power smoothly, and control responses are positive throughout the flight envelope. Jaeger tests gentle turns, speed changes, and configuration adjustments, finding the aircraft remarkably well behaved for such a radical design. Republic Tower. XP-72 performing better than advertised up here. Jaeger reports after 30 minutes of flight testing, this bird wants to go fast, real fast. Engine parameters all in the green. Handling characteristics are outstanding for an aircraft this size. But the real validation comes during the high-speed portion of the test flight. At 15,000 feet, Jaeger advances the throttle to military power and watches the airspeed indicator climb past 450 mph, then 460, then 470. The XP-72 continues accelerating smoothly, with no sign of the control problems that plagued earlier high-speed taxi tests. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Jaeger exclaims as the airspeed reaches 485 km peak. Republic Tower, "I'm indicating 485 miles per hour in level flight, and this engine's still got more to give. This is the fastest I've ever flown." The landing approach reveals another pleasant surprise. Despite its enormous size and weight, the XP-72 handles predictably during pattern work. The powerful engine provides excellent go-around capability, and the large wing area gives reasonable landing speeds. Jaeger touches down smoothly at 847 hours, exactly 1 hour and 24 minutes after takeoff. As the XP-72 taxis back to Republic's flight line, spontaneous cheering erupts from the assembled observers. Kartveli removes his glasses and wipes away tears of relief and vindication. His impossible fighter has not only flown successfully, but demonstrated performance that exceeds even his optimistic projections. The post-flight debriefing is euphoric. Jaeger's preliminary report describes an aircraft with fighter performance unlike anything in the world. Maximum speed approaches 490 mph. Rate of climb exceeds 4,500 feet per minute. Range calculations suggest combat radius over 1,000 miles with internal fuel only. Most importantly, the XP-72 demonstrates the stability and controllability needed for effective bomber escort missions. "Gentlemen," Jaeger tells the assembled officials, "this aircraft will outrun, outclimb, and outfight anything the Germans have or are likely to develop. It's not just faster than existing fighters, it's in a completely different performance category." Within hours, preliminary flight test data reaches Washington. Colonel Bradley, who has spent months trying to kill the XP-72 program, finds himself drafting authorization for expanded flight testing instead of termination orders. The news of the XP-72's successful first flight spreads through military aviation circles like wildfire. Within 24 hours, Chuck Yeager's preliminary report reaches the highest levels of the Army Air Forces, and the reaction is immediate and dramatic. Officers who dismissed Kartveli's design as impossible are now demanding detailed performance data. The same Pentagon officials who tried to cancel the program are suddenly asking how quickly Republic can build operational aircraft. General Henry Hap Arnold personally calls Alexander Kartveli on June 11th, just one day after the historic first flight. "Mr. Kartveli. Arnold's voice carries a mixture of excitement and urgency. If your aircraft can do what Chuck Yeager says it can do, you may have just changed the course of this war. I'm authorizing expanded flight testing immediately. I want to know everything this aircraft can do, and I want to know it fast. The most dramatic conversion comes from Colonel James Doolittle, who had opposed the XP-72 program during the March Pentagon meeting. Flying up to Republic Aviation on June 15th, Doolittle personally inspects the revolutionary fighter and speaks extensively with Yeager about its flight characteristics. What he learns transforms him from skeptic to advocate. "I was wrong," Doolittle admits to Kartveli during their meeting. "I was thinking about today's war, not tomorrow's. My Mustang pilots are already reporting encounters with German jets they can't effectively engage. This aircraft could be the answer we need." The second and third test flights, conducted on June 13th and 16th, systematically explore the XP-72's performance envelope. Each flight reveals capabilities that surpass theoretical projections. Maximum speed reaches 492 mph at 25,000 feet, making it the fastest piston engine fighter in the world. Rate of climb peaks at 700 feet per minute, better than many interceptors designed specifically for rapid altitude gain. Most importantly, fuel consumption figures confirm the aircraft's exceptional range capabilities. Edgar Schmude, chief designer of the P-51 Mustang and formerly one of Kartveli's harshest critics, arrives at Republic for a technical briefing on June 20th. North American aviation executives have sent him to assess whether the XP-72 represents a genuine threat to Mustang production contracts. What he discovers forces him to confront an uncomfortable reality. His proven fighter design is about to become obsolete. "Your aircraft is remarkable," Schmude tells Kartveli after reviewing detailed performance data. "And the P-51H we're developing will have excellent performance, but nothing approaching these numbers. If you can solve the production challenges, the XP-72 will make every existing fighter obsolete." But the most significant validation comes from combat veterans who understand the realities of aerial warfare. Major George Preddy, one of the top American aces with 26.83 confirmed victories, flies from England specifically to evaluate the XP-72's combat potential. His assessment carries weight because he's fought German jets in actual combat and understands their capabilities intimately. "Gentlemen," Preddy reports after flying the XP-72 on June 25th, "this aircraft will revolutionize air combat. The Germans' Me-262 is fast, Mike, but it's also fragile and limited by fuel capacity. The XP-72 combines jet-like performance with the reliability and range of piston engines. It's exactly what we need to dominate the skies over Germany." Performance demonstrations conducted for high-ranking officials produce results that seem almost impossible. During a June 28th flight test witnessed by Assistant Secretary of War Robert Lovett, Yeager climbs the XP-72 from sea level to 20,000 feet in just 4 minutes and 12 seconds, a rate of climb that rivals dedicated interceptors. In level flight, the aircraft maintains 485 mph while burning only 180 gallons per hour, giving it a theoretical range of over 2,400 miles. The conversion of institutional skeptics accelerates rapidly as word spreads through the aviation community. General Curtis LeMay, who had dismissed the XP-72 as unnecessary during the March meeting, now requests priority delivery of the first operational aircraft for his strategic bombing operations. "If this fighter can do what the test reports claim," LeMay tells his staff, "it will make our bomber formations virtually untouchable." Republic Aviation's phone rings constantly with orders and inquiries. The Navy wants to know if the XP-72 can be adapted for carrier operations. The British Royal Air Force requests performance data for their own evaluation. Even the Soviet Union, through diplomatic channels, expresses interest in potential licensing agreements. The most telling measure of the XP-72's impact comes from German intelligence. By early July 1944, Luftwaffe headquarters has obtained detailed performance estimates through their spy network. Their response reveals the magnitude of Kartveli's achievement, immediate orders to accelerate jet fighter development, and urgent directives to develop countermeasures against American super fighters. Oberst Adolf Galland, General of Fighter Aircraft for the Luftwaffe, writes in a classified memo intercepted by Allied intelligence, the American XP-72 represents a quantum leap in piston engine fighter performance. If deployed in quantity, it will neutralize our current fighter advantages and make strategic bombing escort missions virtually impossible to intercept. This aircraft must be considered our highest priority threat. By the end of June 1944, the XP-72 program has transformed from a cancelled experiment into the Army Air Force's highest priority fighter development. Production contracts worth over $50 million are being negotiated. The aircraft that Alexander Kartveli conceived in a moment of inspiration has proven that sometimes the impossible is merely the inevitable, waiting for someone bold enough to make it reality. The XP-72's impact extends far beyond the immediate wartime period, fundamentally changing how military aviation approaches the relationship between power, performance, and operational capability. As 1944 progresses into 1945, Republic aviation struggles to meet production demands for an aircraft that has redefined what fighters can accomplish. The waiting list for XP-72 deliveries includes not just American units, but Allied air forces worldwide who recognize they're witnessing the future of aerial combat. But history, as it often does, takes an unexpected turn. Germany's surrender in May 1945 and Japan's capitulation in August dramatically reduced the urgent need for advanced fighter aircraft. The massive production contracts that seemed so crucial in 1944 are cancelled or drastically reduced as America transitions from wartime urgency to peacetime economy. Of the 3,000 XP-72s originally planned, only 43 are ultimately built before production ends in late 1945. However, the technological legacy of Kartveli's revolutionary design proves far more enduring than its production numbers suggest. The engineering principles pioneered in the XP-72, extreme power-to-weight ratio, advanced cooling systems, and structural designs capable of handling enormous forces, become fundamental concepts in post-war aircraft development. When America begins developing jet fighters in the late 1940s, engineers repeatedly reference XP-72 design solutions for handling high power outputs and extreme performance requirements. Alexander Kartveli himself becomes a legend in aeronautical engineering circles. His willingness to abandon conventional thinking and pursue seemingly impossible solutions inspires a generation of designers working on supersonic aircraft, space vehicles, and advanced propulsion systems. The man who refused to accept that escort fighters couldn't be built spends his remaining career developing even more revolutionary concepts, including early work on vertical takeoff aircraft and supersonic transports. The XP-72's influence reaches its zenith during the Korean War, when American pilots flying early jets encounter Soviet-built MiG-15s with performance advantages that negate traditional American technological superiority. Desperate for solutions, the Air Force dusts off Republic's advanced piston engine fighter designs and discovers principles that prove crucial for developing superior jet aircraft. The F-84 Thunderjet and F-105 Thunderchief both incorporate engineering lessons learned from the XP-72 program. Chuck Yeager, who achieved fame breaking the sound barrier in 1947, frequently credits his XP-72 experience as crucial preparation for supersonic flight. Flying that Republic monster taught me about handling enormous power and controlling aircraft at the edge of their performance envelope. Yeager reflects in later interviews, "The XP-72 was like a bridge between conventional fighters and the jet age. It prepared pilots for performance levels we'd never experienced before." The broader lesson of the XP-72 story resonates through decades of technological development. In corporate boardrooms and military procurement offices, planners reference the Kartveli principle, the idea that revolutionary advances often appear impossible until someone demonstrates they're merely difficult. This concept influences everything from computer development in the 1960s to space exploration programs in the 1970s and beyond. Modern fighter aircraft like the F-22 Raptor and F-35 Lightning II incorporate design philosophies that trace directly back to Kartveli's work. Their emphasis on overwhelming power, advanced systems integration, and performance margins that exceed immediate requirements all reflect lessons learned from the XP-72 program. Today's military aviation engineers study Republic's wartime development process as a masterclass in rapid innovation under pressure. The story's contemporary relevance extends beyond aviation into current technological challenges. In Silicon Valley boardrooms, entrepreneurs facing seemingly impossible engineering problems invoke Kartveli's example of refusing to accept conventional limitations. Space exploration companies like SpaceX reference the XP-72's development when explaining how revolutionary aerospace advances require abandoning incremental thinking in favor of transformational approaches. Perhaps most significantly, the XP-72 story demonstrates how individual creativity and determination can overcome institutional resistance to change the course of history. In an era when technological advancement increasingly depends on large teams and massive budgets, Kartveli's achievement reminds us that breakthrough innovations often begin with one person who sees possibilities others dismiss as impossible. The young Georgian immigrant who arrived in America with nothing but engineering knowledge and unshakable determination ultimately gave his adopted country something invaluable. Proof that the impossible is simply the inevitable, waiting for someone bold enough to make it reality. His rejected design didn't just make American bombers untouchable, it demonstrated that the greatest limitations are often in our imagination, not in the laws of physics. Today, as military planners grapple with hypersonic weapons, artificial intelligence, and space-based defense systems, they continue referencing the fundamental lesson Alexander Kartveli taught. Sometimes solving impossible problems simply requires the courage to ignore everyone who says they can't be solved.